In 30 years of working in entertainment, Steve Harvey has developed a reputation for two things. The first is making people laugh. The second, the one that fewer people talk about but just as many have witnessed, is knowing when to stop laughing. He knows the difference between a room that is enjoying itself and a room that needs something else entirely. He has seen enough of both to tell them apart in seconds. What he saw on the afternoon that the Burgess family walked onto his stage was something he had not encountered in quite that form before. He saw a man who had spent years performing a version of himself that his own family had never been allowed to question. He saw a wife who had quietly absorbed the cost of that performance for longer than anyone should have to. And he saw, in the middle of a game show, the exact moment when the performance finally ran out of room. What Steve Harvey said in response has been described by people who were in that studio as the most direct he has ever been on camera, not angry, precise, not attacking, honest. The kind of honest that cuts cleanly because it is not trying to wound anything, only to name what is already there. The Burgess family came to Family Feud for a chance at $20 an thousand. By the time Steve Harvey was finished speaking, the money was almost beside the point. This is the story of Claudette and Harold Burgess, and it begins, the way the most important stories often do, not with a dramatic event but with a quiet one, a single question that finally got an honest answer. Claudette Burgess was 57 years old. She had spent the majority of her adult life in Charlotte, North Carolina, where she worked as an elementary school reading specialist, a job that required, above almost everything else, the ability to see what a person was actually struggling with beneath whatever surface they were presenting. She was good at her work in the particular way of people who chose their profession because it reflects something essential about who they already are. She had grown up in rural North Carolina, the daughter of a tobacco farmer and a seamstress, in a household where resources were limited and expectations were high and nobody wasted words on things that did not need to be said. She had put herself through college on scholarship and loans, graduated with honors, and built a career and a life that her parents had been proud of in the quiet, undemonstrative way of people who consider pride a private matter. She had married Harold Burgess 28 years ago. Harold was from Winston-Salem, broad-shouldered, confident, the kind of man who commanded a room without appearing to try. He had worked in sales for most of his adult life, eventually building a small but successful office supply distribution company that employed 12 people and generated, in good years, a comfortable income. He wore his success like a well-fitted suit, present, visible, and carefully maintained. On the surface, the Burgess marriage looked like one of the solid ones. 2 adult children, their daughter Renee, 31, and their son Philip, 28, both established in their own lives, a house in a good neighborhood, a reputation in their community as a couple who had done things the right way, worked hard, stayed together, built something. But Claudette, who had spent her entire professional life teaching children to read between the lines, had long been aware of something that the surface of her marriage did not reflect. Harold Burgess was a man who did not tell the truth about money, not in dramatic ways, not in ways that had ever produced a genuine crisis, not in ways that a lawyer would have much to work with. In the smaller, more corrosive ways, expenses explained away, numbers rounded, decisions made unilaterally and presented as collaborative after the fact. A second line of credit Claudette had not known about until a statement arrived at the house. A business loss absorbed quietly into household savings without discussion. An investment made in a friend's venture that had failed, the failure mentioned only when the tax documentation required it. None of it had been catastrophic. All of it had been dishonest. And the cumulative weight of 28 years of small dishonesty is not small. It builds the way water builds behind a structure not quite designed to hold it, slowly, without drama, until one day the pressure is simply greater than the barrier. Claudette had addressed it directly, more than once. Harold's response had always been some version of the same thing, that he was protecting her from stress, that he handled the finances and knew what he was doing, that she worried too much, that everything was fine. He said these things with the smooth conviction of a man who has been selling for 30 years and no longer distinguishes between persuading a client and persuading his wife. Their daughter Renee had entered the family in the Family Feud contestant pool the previous spring as a gift for her parents' 28th anniversary. She had done it with genuine affection. Her parents loved game shows, and she thought it would be fun, something light and celebratory, a day worth talking about. Claudette had packed her reading glasses and a cardigan for the studio. Harold had put on his best blazer. Philip had driven up from Columbia the night before. Renee had taken the day off work. Nobody had anticipated what Harold was going to say when Steve Harvey asked him a question so straightforward that it had never, in the history of the show, produced anything other than a laugh. The Burgess family played the opening rounds well. Harold was charismatic in the way of men accustomed to performing under social pressure, quick on his feet, comfortable with the audience, generating easy laughter. Philip inherited his father's timing and his mother's accuracy in about equal measure. Renee was focused and sharp. Claudette played deliberately, choosing her moments, contributing cleanly without drawing attention to herself. The family advanced. The crowd liked them. The energy on stage was confident and warm, the particular warmth of a family that presents well together and knows it. They reached the interview portion of the show, the segment Steve Harvey uses to get to know the families before the stakes increase. He moved through the family with his usual ease, finding the jokes, finding the stories, reading each person with the accuracy of a man who has had 20 years of practice at exactly this. He reached Harold last. "Harold," Steve said, settling into the easy rhythm of the segment. 28 years of marriage, that's serious time. I have to ask, what is the one thing you have never told your wife? The one thing she doesn't know about you? It is a question Steve Harvey asks regularly. It is designed to produce a harmless confession, a secret snack habit, a hidden hobby, a mildly embarrassing fear. It produces laughter 99 times out of 100, a brief window into the comfortable absurdity of long marriages, and then the game continues. Harold Burgess smiled the smile of a man who is entirely at ease. He looked at the audience. He looked at Steve Harvey. He did not look at his wife. And then, with the ease of a man who has been telling half-truths for so long that the distinction between them and the full truth has become genuinely blurry, he said, "Honestly, there have been a few times over the years when the business had a rough patch, nothing serious. And I handled it without bothering Claudette. Kept things smooth. Wives don't need to worry about every little thing." He delivered it lightly, with a small laugh at the end, in the tone of a man sharing a charming marital confidence. The kind of answer that expects a nod and a chuckle and a move to the next question. What he got instead was silence. Not the dramatic silence of a room that has heard something shocking, the particular silence of a room in which a significant number of people, beginning with Claudette, have heard something and recognized exactly what it was. Claudette had not moved. She was standing at the podium with her hands folded and her expression absolutely still, in the way of a woman who has spent 28 years recognizing a certain kind of statement and has become very practiced at not reacting to it in public. But her eyes had changed. Anyone watching closely, and Steve Harvey was watching closely, could see it. The change that happens in a person's face when something they have carried privately for a long time is suddenly, casually, named out loud by the person responsible for it, and named as though it is nothing, as though it is even admirable. Renee, beside her mother, had gone very still. She was looking at her father with an expression that contained a question she had clearly not known, until this moment, that she needed to ask. Philip was staring at the floor. Steve Harvey had stopped moving. He was looking at Harold Burgess. Then he looked at Claudette. Then back at Harold. The smile on Harold's face was beginning to register that something had not landed the way he intended. He glanced toward Claudette. Then back to Steve. The smile held, but thinly now, the way a performance holds when the performer begins to sense he has lost the room. Steve Harvey took a single breath. Then he said, in a voice that was quiet and entirely without humor, "Say that again for me, Harold. You handled things without bothering Claudette." "Well, kept things manageable," Harold said, still reaching for the light tone. "She's got enough on her plate. I didn't want." Harold. Steve's voice was not raised. It was, if anything, quieter. But it had the quality of something that does not intend to be redirected. I'm going to ask you something, and I need you to hear the question I'm actually asking, not the one you want to answer. The audience was completely still. Does your wife know the full picture of your finances? Yes or no? Harold's smile finished dying. The studio waited. Harold said nothing for a moment that lasted much longer than it should have. Then, quietly, without the performance, probably not everything. Claudette closed her eyes, just for a second, then opened them and looked straight ahead, the way a person looks when they are processing confirmation of something they already knew and had spent years hoping they were wrong about. Steve Harvey set his microphone to his side and stood in the center of the stage for a moment that, to everyone watching, felt like a decision being made in real time. Then he looked at Harold Burgess with an expression that had nothing performative in it whatsoever. I'm going to talk to you straight, Steve said. Man to man, because I think that's the only kind of conversation worth having right now. Harold had stopped performing. He was standing with his hands at his sides, the blazer that had looked so well fitted an hour ago, suddenly seeming like something he was wearing rather than something he inhabited. You just told this entire room, your wife, your daughter, your son, 200 strangers, and everybody watching at home, that you have been managing your family's financial life without your wife's full knowledge for 28 years. And you said it like it was something to be proud of. Steve paused, not for effect, for accuracy, the pause of a man making sure his words are precise. You called it not bothering her. You called it keeping things smooth. I want to tell you what I think it actually is. Harold met his eyes. His jaw was set, but he did not look away. Whatever else could be said about Harold Burgess, he was not a man who looked away. It's control, Steve said. When you decide alone what your wife gets to know about the life you are building together. That is not protection. That is control. And the difference between those two things matters enormously. Protection says, I am going to carry this so you don't have to. Control says, I am going to decide what you're allowed to see. Those are not the same thing. They are not even close to the same thing. The room was completely quiet. Now I don't know everything about your marriage, Steve continued, and his voice had not risen. If anything, it had gotten quieter, more deliberate, the voice of a man who understands that the most important things do not need to be shouted. I don't know what kind of husband you've been in the other rooms of your life. Maybe you've been a good one in a lot of ways. But I'm talking about this one. I'm talking about what you just said on this stage. And I need you to understand something. Your wife is not a person you manage. She is your partner. And a partner has the right to know. Harold swallowed. He looked, for the first time that afternoon, like exactly his age. Steve turned to Claudette. Claudette. His voice shifted. Same quietness, different quality. Softer without being soft. How long have you known? Claudette looked at Steve Harvey for a moment. Then she answered with the directness of a woman who has decided, in the last 5 minutes, that she is done being careful about this particular subject in front of other people. Long enough, she said. Long enough that I stopped asking the questions I knew wouldn't get straight answers. Several people in the audience audibly exhaled. And you stayed, Steve said. Not as a question, as an acknowledgement. I stayed, Claudette said, because I love my husband and my family, and I believed the rest of it was workable if we were honest about it. We just, she paused, were never quite honest about it. Steve nodded. He let the statement stand on its own for a moment the way it deserved to. Then he turned back to the full stage, Harold, Claudette, Renee, Philip, and addressed all of them together. I want to say something to this family, not to embarrass anybody and not to make a television moment out of something that is genuinely serious. What just happened here is not unusual. It happens in families all over this country. One person makes decisions that belong to both people, and they justify it to themselves, and the other person slowly stops asking questions because the questions don't get answered, and then 10 years go by, and then 20, and then it becomes just the shape of the marriage, something everyone has adjusted around without anybody ever deciding that was acceptable. He looked at Harold directly. Harold, I'm not asking you to fall apart on this stage. I'm asking you to hear one thing. Your wife has been reading between your lines for 28 years because you wouldn't give her the full page. That ends today. Not because you got caught, because it is the right thing to do. Because she has earned the truth. Because a woman who has stood beside you for 28 years and built a family with you and is standing right there. He gestured toward Claudette. In that green cardigan, still, deserves your full honesty, not your managed version of it. All of it. Harold Burgess looked at his wife, and what moved across his face in that moment was not the smooth competence of the salesman or the confident ease of the man who commands a room. It was something much older than either of those things. Shame, yes, but underneath the shame, something that might have been, if given room, the beginning of relief. Claudette, he said. His voice had lost all of its performance. What remained was just a man in his late 50s, saying his wife's name in a way that sounded like he was hearing it for the first time in a long time. I owe you a real conversation. I've owed you that for a long time. Claudette looked at her husband without softening and without hardening, the look of a woman who has not decided anything yet and is not going to decide anything on a television stage. Yes, she said simply, you do. The audience gave them something rarer than applause. It gave them a moment of complete, respectful silence, the kind that is its own form of acknowledgement. Steve Harvey stood between them and addressed the cameras. Ladies and gentlemen, we are going to take a break. And when we come back, we are going to finish this game, because the Burgess family came here today and they deserve to play it out. He paused. But I want to say one thing before we go. What just happened on this stage is not a scandal, it is not entertainment. It is a family that has been given, maybe for the first time, the chance to be honest with each other in front of people who are witnessing it. That matters. Witnesses matter. You can't say something in front of 200 people. That, he said, looking briefly at Harold, is not a threat. That is a gift. The episode aired on a Wednesday. By Thursday morning, the segment had been shared across social media with a consistency and a sincerity that the production team noted was distinct from the usual viral pattern of Family Feud moments. Most clips from the show circulate because they are funny. This one circulated because it was true. The specific phrase Steve Harvey had used, "Your wife is not a person you manage, she is your partner," appeared in comment sections, in personal essays, in text messages between women who had watched it together and recognized in Harold's manner something they had encountered in their own lives and had never quite heard named so cleanly in public. Financial therapists and marriage counselors shared it in their professional networks. Several wrote about it at length, about the specific and underexamined dynamic of financial opacity in long marriages, about the way that control, when it is not dramatic, can become invisible even to the people inside it. Harold Burgess did not give any public statement in the weeks following the broadcast. What he did, within 10 days of the episode airing, was schedule an appointment with a financial advisor and ask Claudette to attend with him. It was the first time in 28 years that both of them had sat in the same room, with the same set of numbers in front of them. Claudette described the experience to her sister as, "Not as bad as I feared, and more complicated than I was prepared for." The finances, it turned out, were not catastrophic. Harold had not been hiding ruin. He had been hiding imperfection, a pattern of decisions made under pressure and corrected quietly, a picture of management that required, above all, that no one looked too closely. Exposed to full light, it was the picture of a man who had been managing his anxiety about money by controlling the information around it, rather than sharing the anxiety with the person best positioned to help carry it. Claudette, who had spent her career identifying what children were actually struggling with beneath the surface they presented, recognized this with a clarity she later described as both frustrating and, oddly, a relief. "I kept waiting for the terrible thing," she told her sister. And the terrible thing turned out to be that there wasn't a terrible thing. There was just a man who was scared and never said so. 28 years of not saying so. The Burgess family entered couples counseling in the month following the taping. It was Renee who found the therapist. a woman in Charlotte who specialized in financial conflict in long-term marriages, a specialty that is more in demand than most people realize until they need it. Harold attended every session. Claudette attended every session. Philip, who lived in Colombia and had processed much of his reaction in a long phone call with his sister the night the episode aired, joined for 2 family sessions and said afterward that it was the most honest his family had ever been in a single room. "My dad is a proud man," Philip said in a later conversation with a family friend who subsequently shared the exchange publicly, with permission. Pride can look like a lot of things. For him, it looked like never letting anyone see the parts that weren't working. "I think for a long time we all just accepted that as the way he was." The show made it impossible to accept anymore. And weirdly, and I don't think I could have said this a month after it happened, but I can say it now, that was probably the best thing that could have happened for all of us. Steve Harvey was asked about the Burgess segment during an appearance on a radio program approximately 2 months after the episode aired. The interviewer described it as the moment Steve went off on a contestant and asked whether he regretted being so direct. Steve Harvey's answer was immediate. "No, and I want to push back on the framing a little. I didn't go off. Going off is when you lose control. I didn't lose control. I said what I saw as clearly as I could, because that was what the situation required." Harold Burgess was not a bad man. He was a man who had developed a very bad habit and had never been asked to look at it directly. "I looked at it with him. That's not going off. That's telling the truth." He was pressed had he been worried about overstepping, given that he was on a game show and not a counseling stage. "I'm always aware of that line," he said. "But I'm also aware that I have a microphone and a platform, and that the people standing on that stage are real people with real lives, and that the least I can do is be honest with them when the moment calls for it. What was the alternative? Make a joke and move on? That family deserved better than that." 8 months after the taping, Claudette Burgess was invited to speak at a conference for women in education on the topic of financial literacy and partnership. She accepted. Her remarks were not about Harold. She protected his privacy with the same consideration she had always extended to the private lives of her students' families. But about the broader question of what it means to be informed, in a marriage and in a life, and about the particular cost to women of being managed rather than consulted. "We teach children to read so that no one can hand them a page and tell them it says something it doesn't," she said. "The same principle applies to every room in our lives. You are entitled to the full text. Not the edited version. Not the version someone else has decided is appropriate for you. The full text." The speech was shared widely within education and women's professional networks. Several people who attended described it as one of the most quietly powerful things they had heard in years. Harold, who had been in the audience, stood up when it was over. The gesture was noted by everyone in the room, and by no one more than Claudette, who saw it from the podium and whose expression, by several accounts, was the expression of a woman who has received something she had waited a long time for, and is choosing to accept it with grace rather than demand. 1 year after the taping, the Burgess family returned to Charlotte from a vacation they had taken together. Harold, Claudette, Renee, and Philip, the first family vacation in several years that had been planned collaboratively, with full information, and with a shared budget that everyone had agreed to in advance. It was, by all accounts, an ordinary trip. Beach, good food, a few arguments about restaurant choices, laughter at dinner. Claudette sent a brief note to the Family Feud production team, not for publication, just as a courtesy, that said, "We are doing well. Better actually. Thank you for the show, and please thank Mr. Harvey for saying what needed to be said." The note was passed to Steve Harvey, who read it before a taping and kept it. He has said, on more than one occasion, that the notes he receives from families, not the fan mail, but the quiet private ones, are among the most important reminders he has of what the show actually is when it is working the way it should. Harold Burgess has never spoken publicly about the experience. What he has done, by every account available to the people who know the family, is change the specific thing that needed changing. The full financial picture of the Burgess household is now a shared one. The decisions are made together. The anxiety, which was always there, is now spoken rather than managed into silence. It is not a dramatic transformation. It is not the kind of story that resolves into a tidy conclusion. It is a marriage that was given, in the middle of a game show on a Wednesday afternoon, one brutally clear look at itself, and chose slowly and without fanfare to become more honest than it had been. Steve Harvey has said that what he remembers most about that afternoon is not the moment he spoke, but the moment just before. The look on Claudette Burgess's face when Harold said, "Probably not everything," and the way she had closed her eyes for exactly 1 second before opening them again and looking straight ahead. That 1 second, Steve said. That was 28 years in 1 second. I saw it and I thought, someone needs to name what is happening here, because she has been closing her eyes for 1 second and opening them and looking straight ahead for a very long time, and she deserved to have it named. He paused. So I named it. That's all I did.